Hello, my friends. How are you all doing? I'm so excited to introduce you to a very special guest. And her name is Jennifer Finlayson-Fife. Maybe you have heard of her, maybe you have not. But she is someone that I've been following for several years. And I was introduced to her, I would say 3 or 4 years ago when I was trying to find help for my marriage and what was going on. And deep down inside, I knew I was the crazy one. At least I was willing to like own that I was the crazy one. And I started following her, started reading her her information, and one thing led me to another, which led me to another course, which led me to her Facebook group site, which led me to her subscribed only podcast, which we will talk later. But throughout this process, it has been a really life-changing experience for me because I've been able to learn a lot about myself and what was working and what was not working and why in my marriage that I am now separated from. But before we head into all the questions about what Jennifer Finlayson-Fife has to do with divorce and not just like intact relationships, I just want to introduce you to her and some of her background. She is a relationship and sexuality educator and coach, as well as a licensed clinical professional counselor in Illinois with a PhD in counseling psychology from Boston College. She actually wrote her dissertation on LDS women and sexuality, and this was, when was this, Jennifer?
2002 is when I finished it.
Okay, that's amazing. Like I guess maybe in my mind, it seemed that it was so ahead of its time and something that we would now need, expertise in. So
Yeah.
thank you for that. And right now, she currently teaches online courses and live workshops to individuals and couples seeking to develop their capacity for deeper emotional and sexual intimacy. And she also provides limited private and group coaching services to individuals and couples who have benefited from her podcast, as well as her courses for men, women, and couples. And I do have to say that I have been able to take in her courses, and they have been so insightful. And the questions she asks you are the questions that needs to be asked. And my goal that's on my bucket list is to go on a retreat with her. So I haven't done that yet, but it will happen. It will happen. But you can find Jennifer's work on multiple podcast sites and blog sites that are also LDS themed, and including the Ask a Mormon Sex Therapist podcast series. And she and her husband are parents of 3 children and are active members of the LDS Church. So, is there anything else you want to add to that, Jennifer, that you would like us to know?
Oh, that's plenty. That's good.
Okay, awesome. All right. When I first thought about asking you to come on to this podcast and talk to divorced women, my first thought was, I must be crazy to ask her to do this because your work is around couples that are intact still, and they're still wrestling with their relationship and in trying to make sense of what is working and what is not working and why it's not working. But the one thing that came up for me as I was thinking about wanting to have you on here was the concept and principle of differentiation. And and honestly, I've heard you talk about this before my separation, but it wasn't until after my separation that I figured out what it really, really meant and what it meant for me to start self-confronting my part in what was not working. And so, would you take a moment and define what differentiation is and what it is not?
Yeah. Well, so differentiation is really a word that describes a developmental process that human beings go through, and some differentiate and develop far further along than others do. When we start out as babies, we are in a state of sort of psychological symbiosis. We don't even know there's a difference between ourselves and our caregiver because we have no perspective that allows us to be self-aware or to know reality outside of our own own immediate experience. We're just living in experience. And what development is we start to move from just experiencing being to reflecting on or knowing or understanding our experience, but not just enacting it. And so it's and so as you grow and develop, you move out of that kind of ego state into more awareness of other people, but also you grow out of your dependency on others to tell you who you are, others to reinforce that you matter or that you're safe or that you belong. And so as you grow, you get more able to sustain your sense of self while being in close proximity with others, while being with important others, others that have high impact on your sense of self, including someone you're divorcing, right?
Yeah.
Because they will say a lot about who you are and it matters to your sense of self. And so being able to regulate your sense of self, even with important others, is the marker. It's not what sometimes people might think of as sort of the I'm independent, I don't need anyone, I'm so differentiated, because oftentimes people who are trying to live separately from others are in fact, because they can't manage their sense of self when they're close to others. So it's not about people that are isolated or say they don't need anyone. It's about, I can let you really matter to me and still regulate my sense of self. And the better able you are to do that, the more differentiated.
I love that. And I learned this lesson, like I said, like after my separation. And it hit me because I think as I was learning this principle from you, I swung to the other end of the spectrum. And I'm like, well, I don't care what he says about me. I don't care. And
Mm.
he doesn't have to matter. And I thought that's what it was. But it wasn't until really after my during my separation that it hit me what it was. And I
Mm.
realized that all my growing up years, I I had a lot of people like praise me for what I did. So I
Yeah.
went into the relationship thinking, well, that's what you're supposed to do for me. Like you're supposed to
Right.
praise me, right? Like you're supposed to tell me how great I am and how great I do this or how great I will be at doing this. And he just wouldn't do it. And I
Mm.
was like, what is wrong with you? And
Right.
then what is wrong with me?
Right.
And once that light bulb just like went off into my brain, like, oh, that is what Jennifer was talking about
Mm.
in
Yeah.
learning how to regulate my sense of self.
Right.
That's when
Exactly.
things started shifting for me.
Yes. Right. So often when we get married, what we are imagining we're doing is we're locking in somebody who's going to validate our sense of mattering and our
Absolutely.
desirability and all those things. And like we're locking in kind of a parent that's going to be a romantic partner, a parent figure. You fill me up, you make me feel good. And that's often what is happening when we're dating, but it's not happening after the honeymoon. And so these issues of self are often front and center in a marriage relationship. Now, of course, as we're going to talk about, they're front and center in life. It's just that they can often get revealed in marriage, just as they can be revealed in divorce,
Yeah.
because these issues of self come to the fore.
Yeah. So, is it possible to begin the process of differentiation in the container of divorce then? Is that
Oh,
possible?
100%. So, it's often, first of all, it's often in crisis that our brains are the most able to adapt and to grow, because the current way of thinking isn't working anymore. And
Yeah.
so, as much as we hate crisis as human beings, because it just hurts, right? And it's so uncomfortable, it's often what is pressuring us into people that can manage our sense of self better than we could prior to the crisis. So a crisis of divorce is a loss of what you thought was going to be a place of happiness, what you had invested a lot of hope in, where you thought you were going to love and be loved. And for that to crumble is often to is disorganizing, because you're not getting that validation anymore, and in fact you may be getting plenty of invalidation, right? They may be even
Totally.
rejecting you more to justify the divorce. I don't mean that the divorce shouldn't happen necessarily, but oftentimes people are almost swinging the other way to kind of make themselves be more comfortable with their choices. And so you're getting lots of invalidation, but also, as you say, like you're starting to see aspects of yourself that contributed to the problem. You're starting to say, like, wait a minute, maybe I was too dependent. Maybe I was too needy. Maybe I was asking for more than is actually fair. So a lot of times divorce reveals not just our partner to us more clearly, but reveals ourselves to us more clearly. And that's the driver of differentiation.
I love that. And at the same time, it can seem like such bad news. I'm putting these in air quotes,
Yeah.
that it is in times of crisis
Yeah.
where our
No.
greatest growth can happen.
Yeah. Yeah. It's true. I mean, look, the times of stasis and stability are wonderful. It's when we can relax a bit, enjoy life a bit. But it's true. It's really when the level at which we're operating no longer works that our brain has to scramble to be able to solve at a higher level. And so that drives growth. It's always growth always happens in discomfort. I mean, it's true,
It
you know.
does. It does. And it's interesting that as I'm kind of thinking back from like the beginning of my separation, I was still trying to receive validation. I
Yeah.
was still like,
Yeah.
why can't you do this for me? This is how it
Right.
should happen, like especially on a legal standpoint. But it
Yes.
wasn't, but then when I realized he's not validating me, he's not giving me what I want,
Right.
then it was like, then my brain, I think, really went into crisis mode. Like,
Yeah.
this is really happening.
Right.
And so when you are helping couples, are there certain questions or tools that you help them to begin to step into the principle of differentiation and for them to learn to find who they really are? And can these same tools and principles and questions be applied to women going through separation and divorce?
Yeah. So yes, they can definitely be applied to separation and divorce. I think so what are the tools? I mean, what I would say is just going back to kind of your earlier idea around divorce and separation, or when you realize he is not going to give me what I want. Really, it's our ability, seems a little paradoxical, but our ability to tolerate solitude, aloneness,
Mm,
invalidation is directly proportional to our ability to tolerate intimacy. Now, some people may be like, "That's not true. I'm all about the intimacy. I hate solitude." Okay, and what I and what I would say is, what we usually are all about is validation and closeness, right? Those of us who
got
like
it.
closeness, we like the approval, we like the affection, we like the sense of being desired. But intimacy is not quite so pleasant. Intimacy is the tolerance of knowing another person and being known by them. And when you really know somebody and are known by them, there are gaps. There are places of disconnection, of invalidation, if you let yourself be really honest. Now, most of us in marriage try to mask the parts of ourselves that we think will not be validated, or
Yeah.
mask from our own minds the parts of our spouse we don't want to know.
Yeah.
And so we often collude in the not knowing. But you're recognizing in divorce, like, oh my gosh, I'm alone in this, is really kind of the marker, what I would say, like the moment that you can learn how to stabilize yourself when an important other, even the same important other you're divorcing, is not going to give you what you want. And how you handle that and what you learn from it and what you learn about life has a tremendous amount to do with differentiation. So going to your question of kind of what are the tools, like, well, let me say one more piece before I get to the tools, is that
Yeah.
one of the reasons why I like doing couples work is not that I'm necessarily saying all couples need to be together and nobody should get divorced and the only way you're going to learn this is being married. I wouldn't say that ever. What I would say is that partnership is an excellent elicitation window. It's an excellent way to see how individuals are functioning because of what they do under the pressure of an important other not giving them the validation they want. Then you really get a picture of how people handle themselves under pressure. how different. I mean, we can all be very nice, regulated, and mature
Yeah.
when we're with people at church or the next door neighbor, as long as the next door neighbor doesn't drive us too crazy. Okay.
Yeah.
We can, meaning when we're with polite people, we can be polite and we can look like we're pretty high functioning. The real measure of our functionality, though, is what are we doing in the face of invalidation when we aren't getting what we want? And so you can see that well in marriage. Okay. But you can also see it well in divorce. And so the question I'm asking, or what I'm often looking at, is how does this person handle invalidation, right? And you're saying, well, I was like, what's wrong with you? Why aren't you giving me what you're
Yeah.
supposed to give me? Okay. That's one of your strategies, right? Like
Clearly.
how can we make you the right kind of person? Okay. So, okay, like believe me, I do the same thing. So this is a very human thing to do. And so it's seeing, what am I doing when I'm not getting what I want? And what impact does that have on the relationship? But also, what impact does it have on me? Right? If I'm trying to get someone else to tell me I'm okay, and I can't be okay unless the world is praising me, even if I came by that honestly because I was praised a lot as a child, I knew how to get it, I liked getting it.
Yeah.
I'm, using other people to get a sense of self. And I don't want to live like that. I don't want to have that impact on people that matter to me, but I also don't want to be so dependent. I don't want to be so insecure. So it can often drive us into that self-awareness that says, wait, I've got to do this better. I don't need the whole world to be telling me I'm great to feel great. I don't feel good about that. And
Yeah.
so, how do I hold on to my dignity more fully, even when I'm not succeeding or when I'm succeeding and no one has noticed? How do I hold on to a sense of my own mattering without asking everybody else to prop me up? And so that's what it's like, giving people a picture of what they do, helping them be less comfortable with it by understanding what its impact is on others and themselves.
Yeah.
And in that self-awareness, offering a better way, a less dependent way to handle their sense of well-being.
Yeah. And just a couple of things that just came out in what you
Sure.
said is that, in a relationship, you were saying that you are including in those points of your relationship where there is a disconnect or a disagreement, or there's
Right. There's
like,
often a collusion. It's
yeah,
not always collusive, but yes, often the definition of collusion, and it's what stabilizes immaturity, is basically we will collude in, you can indulge your immaturity, and I'll use the fact that you do it to indulge my immaturity, and vice
mm,
versa. So we will facilitate the worst in each other as a collusion in neither of us having to grow up. So
absolutely.
let's say let's say that you want to, as a partner, feel covertly superior and that you're needed. Okay. And that's like, okay, that's the way you feel like you're you, is that everybody needs you and you're the secret strong one. Well, then if your spouse is indulgent or reckless or does things that are impulsive or immature, you can just roll your eyes and indulge your immature sense of self while they indulge theirs. I'm going to be theirs is that I don't have to be responsible. I don't have to grow up and people will just fill in for me. Well, that's a collusive alliance because it's one that perpetuates, and you can keep doing your immature behavior while blaming your spouse. Right.
Yeah.
And so it's easy to, people very readily, when they get married, find somebody that they can do their collusive dance with.
Yeah. Clearly. And that I think that's what I've learned, that that's just part of the relationship, and the key is to work through that,
Yes,
and to
exactly.
see where you are occluding, and to be uncomfortable,
That's
to
right.
bring out the discomfort in that.
Exactly. And ideally, letting marriage do what it does best, which is reveal ourselves to ourselves. And,
Yeah.
usually we take those revelations as what's wrong with my partner rather than what's wrong with me. But the more we can be looking at, wait, how am I a part of this problem? That doesn't mean you change your side and your spouse is going to necessarily grow up. but how am I a part of the trouble here? And how do I how do I pollute the air that I then breathe? So that's very, very valuable. At the same time, that sometimes it is no longer right to stay with somebody, right? Even if, but oftentimes as we are getting clearer about ourselves, we may know that we become more clear of what a marriage is capable of or not capable of. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And that's something that I've also realized and am continuing to realize is those parts where we were colluding, those
Mm-hmm.
parts where we weren't talking about the disconnects.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you're going through a separation and divorce, it's very front and center, isn't it? Of those parts that you were disconnected.
Yeah.
And
Right.
so, as I've had to just sit with that disconnect and just be very uncomfortable, I
Mm-hmm.
came to see more clearly like my part in all of this.
Yeah.
And what came for me, and I'm just curious to know what your thought is that as we are becoming, as one becomes more and more clear about those disconnections
Mm-hmm.
and really stepping into facing them,
Mm-hmm.
how does let me see if I can try and word. How does that clarity begin? How can you begin to see that internal clarity shown outward, behavior wise? Does that make sense? Like in your brain, you're probably seeing your client and they're starting to make connections and they're starting to see how were they were part of this dance
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
how they were not being differentiated. And so when they're making that connection, do you start to see a shift in behavior? Do you start to see a shift in
Yeah.
attitude? And
For
what
sure
is,
you do. You do. You know, you just start to see people are just thinking differently about who they are and what they will accept from themselves, you know? So, just what you were saying about, your spouse and kind of like, why aren't you praising me? Um, I just as an example of this, when I first got married, I was like, in our family, we all said what we loved about the person whose birthday it was. My family was much more expressive. My husband's family is not very expressive, right? My family at the wedding dinner is like crying and just spontaneously saying all these things. And John's family has prepared notes, it's just like very, very different stylistically. Well, of course, I'm married to John now, and I want him to behave like my family, just do it my
mm,
family's way.
yeah,
And I was handling it much the same way you talked about, which is what's wrong with you? Like, do you love me or not love me? Like, why aren't you
yeah,
getting And, fortunately, I think, I just started waking up to how entitled I was being. And look, I didn't marry
yeah,
somebody that was like me. I married somebody that was different than me. And I just got more clear like now this is different. This isn't always the case for people because this wasn't about him withholding. This wasn't about him trying to that he didn't care about me. It's that I wanted validation in the way I wanted it, which was high praise, okay?
yeah,
And he just wasn't there for it. It wasn't his style, it wasn't how he thought. And so I had to recognize I'm being a brat, I'm being immature. I'm
that was
being
me.
entitled. And why is my way the right way? So it was
Yeah,
kind of self-confronting that I'm telling him to fold, oh, sorry, a second.
it's totally fine. It happens to me.
Yeah. Oh, annoying. I don't know why everything is suddenly doing this today. Um, Sorry, you can edit that out. But, so it was me getting sobered up a little bit within myself and saying like I'm not going to ask him to live in my, to reinforce me. It's just not loving. It's not fair any more
Yeah,
than I would want him to tell me to stop being emotional and expressive, so let him be who he is. I can feel that he loves me. I mean, that took some self-regulation because I wanted it in the way I wanted it
yeah,
rather than knowing that watching this person, I can see he's invested in my well-being and he cares about me, even though it doesn't necessarily come in the form that I most like. And so it just changed my behavior because I was pushing myself to grow up. I wanted to respect my own behavior more, and I didn't respect the childishness in me that I could see.
Yeah.
And so it
And
just
that
shows up
was,
differently, right? It doesn't mean that I don't
yeah,
still like that. Yes, I like that, but that is, but I, entitled around it is different.
yeah. I totally agree with that. And it took a lot of bravery to admit how entitled I was.
Yeah.
And I think it's very human, but to get to that point where you accept that, okay, I have been an entitled brat. Now what am I
Yes.
going to do?
Yes, exactly. And
Yeah.
it takes a lot of, this is a differentiation thing too, is to forgive yourself. It's not easy, to be like, it's just, we can bring our perfectionism, like, I should have known that. Why was I such an idiot? How could I have not? Um, but most of us don't know how to be more mature until we've spent some time being immature. That is, we kind of have to go through it and pay the price for some of our immaturities to be able to better understand it on the other side. And we can beat ourselves up that we should have somehow known, but I don't think it's particularly honest of us to do that. I don't think it's particularly fair of us to do that to ourselves. And in a way to tolerate that life, that often we don't learn lessons until we've lived them and then can see better, and to, do our best to pick up and to move on. And I think forgiving others is also often a part of the same differentiation process.
Yeah. And I have to agree with you when you said that it is, we have a choice to say, yes, I should have known or I should have done better. But like you said, in all honesty, we just didn't.
That's right.
And something that helped me to get to that part of showing grace and forgiveness for myself is to realize the nature of God. Like he's not
Mhm.
up there shoulding me.
Right.
Like you should know how to do
Exactly.
this. I already gave you everything. You should not have acted that way. Like he's
Right.
not saying that. He's, I think, a more generous God, a more loving
Right.
God, a more understanding God of our
Right.
limitations as humans. And if he is forgiving us,
Right.
you know, can I step into full honesty and forgive myself?
Exactly. Yeah, and exactly. And exactly. So perfectionism and control, because the reason why we can be perfectionistic is we imagine it will give us control, that we won't have to live in negative consequences, right? That
Yes.
we can keep everybody thinking we're above the human condition, right? That we can get the love we want because everybody sees us as without flaw. And so it's an intuitive desire, but it's not a desire that's sustainable in the human condition. And so oftentimes what forgiving is to tolerate living life on life's terms, and that everyone else must do it, right?
Yeah.
That everyone is walking along this path imperfectly in an imperfect world, and we hurt each other sometimes, and we get hurt. And so it doesn't mean you should go blind to people, or that you should trust people who are not trustworthy, or any of those things, or that you shouldn't learn from your mistakes, but in some ways to be gentle with ourselves about the fact that that life is tough, that it's tough. And even when we're trying to do it as wisely as possible, we are still going to have blind spots and missteps, some well intentioned, some ill intentioned, but it's a part of being human and sorting out who we are, and how to live life well. And so to forgive that fact, like even forgive God for putting us on this planet in that reality, and
Yeah.
to forgive ourselves for being imperfect in doing it. That's the whole reality. That's the deal. And
Yeah.
so, but that takes some, I think, awareness and some perspective that we often don't have when we're very caught in our own ego and our own experience.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
It is. And for me, I think part of the journey of differentiation, and and I don't know what you think about this, but I think that the journey of differentiation like never ends. I think it's always a continual learning about yourself and your sense of self. But once I began to really embrace that I was not perfect and above other people, like
Yes.
I'm like,
Yes.
really? Are you sure about that? But once I came to that realization of my own flaws and faults, not as a means of beating myself up, but just that this is the human condition, the human experience.
Yes.
That's when I began to really embrace my spouse's humanness,
Yeah, exactly.
and where he got it wrong too, but not using that as a tool against him,
Yes.
but just I think it really entered into my heart a greater level of compassion
Yeah.
that I didn't think I would ever have felt for him.
Mm.
Like I didn't think that would ever
Yeah.
happen.
Yeah. Good for
And
you.
that definitely helped with the forgiveness part where
Yes.
I I remember a couple times where I just felt so compelled by the spirit just because I think that God knew where I was and I was prepared to take
Yeah.
these steps of asking for forgiveness.
Yeah. Yeah. Good for you.
And so
Yes. I think you're absolutely right. It's like if we see the way another person hurts us or disappoints us and we take it all personally, it's very hard to forgive because basically their missteps, their lack of love, whatever, is like a direct reflection on us. And so if
yeah.
we think their missteps are a kind of judgment against our worthiness, right? We're going to hold resentment as a way of trying to preserve our dignity. And it's very intuitive, but not actually what allows us to be free. And forgiveness is not about, oh, you have to like trust people that are untrustworthy, or you have to like not have feelings of anger. A lot of times people, I think, misunderstand forgiveness. I think
Yeah.
what it ultimately is what you're pointing towards, which is more perspective, perspective on the human condition, perspective on our own fallibility and the fallibility of others, even when it hurts us. And can we forgive that fact, even though it hurts, even though that meant we suffered loss? Can we tolerate that that's what it is to be human and find our dignity, hold on to it, and learn from it all and move forward? I think that's really when we find that kind of bittersweetness, that beauty that's in life in the face of pain.
Yeah. And so do you think that it's possible for someone who is going through a separation and divorce to have a good relationship? Now, when I say that, um, like I also believe that relationships can be like our own mental construct,
Mm,
meaning that I can choose to believe that I have a good relationship with
mm,
my separated spouse.
mm,
Okay, because of how I'm thinking about him, of
mm.
how I'm conducting myself with
Yes.
him, and yet he doesn't have to believe the same way. He can believe I have no relationship with her. Does that
Hmm.
make sense? Like what I'm
Yes.
asking?
Well, I'll go back to the question now because I agree with what you're saying that people can kind of have their own view of how they're in relationship to the other,
Yes.
and they can both be truthful in a sense, um, because there is an element of it that is unilateral. Like I can respect how I'm in relationship with this person, and I feel good about this person, even if they aren't doing the same.
Yeah.
But go back to your question, then. Yeah.
So the question is, I think what I'm wanting to really ask is, does it require two people to think the same way, to act the same way, to feel like you have a good ex-spousal relationship, or can it be you choosing that you have a good relationship because of how you're showing up in the
Yeah.
relationship?
I mean, yes, on some level, yes. I mean, I think how I might say it to myself is I feel good about how I'm relating to my ex-spouse, and I feel, I forgive him for what the marriage couldn't be or wasn't, and I respect how I relate to him. And I'm not going to try and control how he thinks about us, but
Yeah.
I will be a person that I feel, that I can respect how I relate to him. For sure, you can do that.
Okay. And so if someone who is going through a separation and divorce and they're listening to this podcast and listening to what you're saying and they see the wisdom and understand the wisdom of beginning the process of differentiation,
Hmm.
how would you what would you say to this person? Like what would be the
Yeah,
first question or the first step?
good. Well, I think the question I might be focused on is, um, First of all, you don't need to try to not feel pain or not feel what you feel. Like you're going to feel what you feel, and it's going to have lots of feelings of loss, anger, resentment, self justification, self loathing. There's going to be a lot of those.
Yeah.
But I think the question that I might be asking myself is, what can I learn from what has happened? Okay. What can I learn about myself? What can I learn about my partner? What can I learn about this relationship? What I would be careful about is trying to get other people to back up narratives that you feel very invested in having others believe. And what I mean by that is often in divorce, it's complex and it's messy and there's culpability
Yeah.
on both sides. And it's really easy to want to paint a narrative or tell a story of one bad, one good. And a lot of people want to believe that idea. I'm friends with a good one. She's divorcing the bad one. I mean,
Yeah.
and we can easily kind of fall into these simple minded stories that kind of feel good and feel like they can be vindicating, but they keep us from holding the complexity and our role in the marriage. Now, of course, that's different than then saying, well, I'm responsible for all of it. And if I were just to done A, B, and C more, we wouldn't be getting, because that's also devoid of the true complexity, probably. And
Yes.
so you want to be pushing yourself to be as honest with yourself as you can about who you are and about who your spouse is, or your soon to be ex spouse is, how you contributed to the difficulty and how your ex spouse did. And to get the input of wise others, right? Not people that just reinforce your ego or, who say mean things to you about it, but somebody who has some perspective to help you see yourself and your partner more clearly, because this is the kind of information that helps you grow up, helps you learn to be more at peace in your own skin because you're not running from aspects of yourself.
Yeah.
And if you desire at some point, helps you choose more wisely or choose someone and engage in that relationship differently, because you've grown up and learned from your first significant relationship.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts on that one. All right. Well, just before, as we're wrapping up now, can you just share with my people where they can find you, more of your principles and tools and teachings?
Sure. So the best place to go is to my website, which is Finlayson-Fife.com. And on there are at least, four categories of resources. But the first is just if you want to listen to more conversations like this, just conversations with Dr. Jennifer, where I'm talking to different people. And then Room for Two is a subscription podcast where I'm working with real couples on relationship issues, issues in the marriage, issues in the sexual relationship, and so on. And then I have 5 online courses that have to do with self and sexual development and how to be capable of an emotionally and sexually intimate marriage. So those courses are there you can learn more about them on the website. And then finally, I do live events like you talked about here. So those are really the content of the courses, but taken on the road or taken to, an event venue. So yeah. Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And I wanted to, well, first of all, thank you so much for taking the time and to
My
having a
pleasure.
conversation with me and to talking about how we can still build great relationships even going through a separation and divorce. And one of my favorite, aspects of what Jennifer, um, one of my favorite resources that she provides is the podcast that is by subscription only,
Mm.
called Room for Two. And it has been, I cannot tell you how many, actually all of them. I've listened to almost all of them, and I always learn something about myself,
Great.
sometimes in really uncomfortable ways where I have to actually step away for several days and just like marinate in it. And
Yeah.
then I can come back and then
Yeah.
listen to it again.
Good.
But it's that powerful. And I know that I'm part of your Facebook group, Ask a An
LDS marriage and
LDS.
sexuality therapist. Yes,
Yes,
it's a
that
long
is
name.
so good. And I cannot tell you how many times I'm like, have you looked into this subscription that she has called Room for Two? Because I think this will help you.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so since I love that subscription so much, I want to gift a year subscription to one of our listeners,
Oh, okay.
whether it's on one of yours listeners on your podcast or mine.
Great.
And as I was talking to Christy and just kind of like emailing back and forth about how to do this, we decided that we're going to do it on Instagram and for one of our listeners to listen to the podcast and to make a comment as to something that they've learned. So maybe they have a question about differentiation or a question about going through separation and divorce. And this podcast will come out on a Monday, and I'll have all of that information out. We'll give them 5 days to respond, and then I will choose one and
Great.
gift that listener a year subscription just because
Great.
I love it. I love it so much. So
I'm
again,
so
thank
glad. That's
you.
great. Yeah, you're so
Yeah.
welcome. Yeah, wonderful idea.
All right. Again, thank you so much for coming on. And to all my listeners, thank you for jumping on here with us. If you have any questions for me or for Jennifer, please post it on our Instagram sites. She's also found on Instagram. Do you know what your Instagram handle is, Jennifer?
Finlayson-Fife, just one word, Finlayson-Fife.
Okay. Finlayson-Fife. All right. So please follow her. Please follow me for more content and information as to how you can grow within yourself, even go through a separation and divorce. And in the meantime, I will talk to you again. Take care, everyone. Bye.